It took about 24 hours from the moment the Nobel laureate Professor Tim Hunt's comments about women were reported to his resignation as an honorary professor at University College London, an immense price to pay for something that he said was meant to be ironic and light-hearted. At the event in South Korea, he had said that the trouble with girls was that they cried when their work was criticised and argued in favour of single-sex laboratories because of the difficulties with relationships in the lab.
I did mean the part about having trouble with girls. I mean, it is true that I have fallen in love with people in the lab, and the people in the lab have fallen in love with me, and it's very disruptive to the science, because it's terribly important that in a lab people are sort of on a level playing field, and I found that these emotional entanglements made life very difficult. I mean, I'm really, really sorry that I caused any offence. That's awful. I mean, I certainly didn't mean... I just meant to be honest, actually.
Was there an overreaction to what Professor Hunt said? He's lost his UCL position over it and been mocked on social media with widespread use of the hashtag distractingly sexy, often with women scientists posting pictures of themselves at work. The feminist journalist and activist Carolyn Creasia Paresis is with us in the studio. And in Oxford is Professor Dame Valerie Beral, Director of the Cancer Epidemiology Unit at the University of Oxford. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Good morning.
Professor Beral, what did you think of the reaction this week to what Professor Hunt said?
Well, I think it was really very unfortunate. Professor Hunt is really, I've known him for a while. I haven't really spoken to him for the last 20 years, but he's a very kind and very eccentric, unworldly sort of man. And he said things that I think have just been misinterpreted. And I also think, and I think that's very unfortunate, but I also think that some of the things he said are very relevant for women in science and should be thought about a bit more seriously and not joked about. And I would like to explain why.
Yes.
The reason is, I mean, everybody knows it's not that there are few women in senior positions in science, that when you look, though, at university and even doing sort of just after university doctoral students, there are as many women as men. And yet, as you go up the seniority, there are fewer and fewer women. There's been a research of certain sorts on that, and it's completely clear that one major reason is that women do not apply for senior jobs. Women who are equally qualified as men will not apply. And I think there's some truths and possibly truths. I mean, what I've said so far is factual, but I think that some of the things that Tim said have to be thought about. And I think that... even though he said them awkwardly and have been misinterpreted, I think they are directly relevant to women, because I think women it's very exciting to work in a lab out of university with all these very bright people doing interesting work, but things happen in that context. As he said, people fall in love, out of love, have affairs, criticise each other, often very intensely. And I think this is something I think we really should be thinking about quite seriously, that maybe women really find that sort of environment too difficult to cope with. Right, not intellectually, not work-wise, but emotionally. I think women are much more likely to take criticism, personally think there's something wrong with themselves, rather than with the work which may have been criticised. And I think this is a problem that we really should be thinking about.
Right, and perhaps exactly that the cause that you're talking about has been put back by women's fears being exacerbated by comments like this, because they'll worry even more about how they'll be perceived in the workplace.
Exactly. I think that really is, because I certainly know in my experience, you say to women, I try, apply for this job, you're good, apply for it, and they just say, I don't want the hassle, I don't like the way things happen. And it's that, and it's not necessarily, of course they're sexist, and I don't think Tim Hunt is a sexist, of course they're sexist, there are all sorts of things that go on, but there is this, to me, a problem that women don't feel, they're too concerned about the way they're perceived rather than the way their science is perceived.
Carolyn Creasia Paresis, let's just go back to the reaction, and particularly the reaction online on social media to what Professor Hunt said. Was it an overreaction, do you think?
I actually thought the distractingly sexy selfies were actually really funny, and I thought that was actually a very good way of dealing with that kind of comment, to not take it in this very serious manner, but to just frankly show it up to be the ridiculous thing that it is. The idea that women wearing these goggles and wearing these huge boots and things should be somehow, because women have this mystique, and we can't help these, turning these poor little men scientists into sort of puddles of desire.
Right, but do you accept that by doing that, the effect of it was to ridicule him for something that he put his hands up and said, look, I didn't mean to offend, and he stood by some of what he said, but he did say he was sorry. He did say he was sorry, but ultimately I think he did kind of stand by everything he said. Ultimately, he sort of said, well, actually, women are kind of over-emotional, and also, there is this problem with relationships. My concern is more with when we allow public reaction to dictate what happens outside of the internet, when we allow public, for want of a better word, online mobs to be able to dictate what a university is going to do, whether or not they're going to allow someone to stay in their position or not. I think certainly the comments that he made displayed a level of prejudice that I would be very worried if he were, for example, being in charge of grant applications or PhD applications, because if he really thinks that women are too emotional to be able to engage in science properly, then I would suggest he's too prejudiced to be able to be objective. But I'm not clear from what you're saying whether you think it was right for him to resign from the position he held at UCL, or whether you think that was an overreaction of taking the criticism online outside the online sphere. Well, because I don't know exactly what the situation is in UCL, whether there's anything from beforehand that this was playing on as well. If it was literally just because of these comments, no, I don't think that resigning was absolutely the only thing that could be done. I think that they could have perhaps reviewed the decisions that he was taking and the positions where he had authority over women's careers. I think that there is. I do feel slightly concerned over the sort of progressive section of society that seems to leap from someone making a comment that we disagree with to immediately they are cast out and ostracised. It's hounding. It is hounding, and I do worry about. Well, for two reasons. One is that, the idea that it's just a couple of bad apples actually, I think, takes away from what is a structural problem. And I don't think it's just about getting rid of a few sexist men. But also this idea that people can't learn and they can't change and that we can't educate people. And I think that's really what we need to be doing, is changing people's minds rather than just saying, you're no good, get out of here. And Professor Beral, on the point about sexism in the workplace, particularly in science, you seem to be putting the emphasis on women having to change to deal with it. No. I think that is just one aspect that women's, if you like, lack of confidence, insecurity, that does come through, and it comes through not at the stage even when they're doing the PhD, but later. And I think it is quite important and should be thought about. Of course, there's sexism, and I would like to say that I've read a lot of things in the last 24 hours, and the one thing you really cannot accuse Tim Hunt of being a sexist. He's very supportive of women in the lab. There's been a lot of online comments of how much he's liked and has always been supportive of women. And it's just, he said very odd things, which I absolutely agree sounded terrible. And he stood by them in the sense of saying, of honesty. He's sort of scrupulously honest. He said, yes, I did say that. He didn't say... I was wrong. It was, he didn't, but he did, but he just said there are things that happen, and that's what's happened to me, and I confirm that's what's happened to me. And I think anyone in any field where there are intense, lots of bright young people working together, it could be in the city, it could be anywhere, have seen these sorts of things happen. And I just think women take these intense environments a bit too seriously, and if something goes wrong, they take it too personally, I think. But I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have evidence for that, but I believe it may be so. Professor Dame Valerie Beral and Carolyn Creasia Paresis, thank you both. Thank you.